Hello and welcome to Better Under Pressure. I'm Sara Milne Rowe, author of The Shed Method and founder of Coaching Impact. And in this podcast, I talk to leaders from all walks of life about being better under pressure and using pressure for better. I want to explore how we handle pressure in a world that is becoming more and more complex, the impact that pressure has on our ability to perform at our best, and what we do to be better under pressure.
I mean, people were crying. I was very worried about some of the team who were in a different time zone to me, and I could go and comfort them. They were incredibly upset. They felt that it was their fault, that they were going to be fired, that they were in real trouble. But once I'd made the decision, I'm very rigorous. I'm a real girl guide about these things. I have to do my, what is it we're really doing? Answer all my questions. Then I have okay, this is my rationale. It's very unfortunate that this is the trade-off, but this is the rationale. And I really remember feeling that moment of utter dread to have to open my mouth and say, I'm pulling the launch, and feeling incredible afterwards.
Today, I'm talking to Anna Rafferty, Vice President of Digital Consumer Engagement at the Lego Group. She leads their direct engagement with all consumers, from preschool children to adult fans of Lego Play. She takes additional special responsibility for digital child safety, rights and well-being. She took that role after having worked as Global Digital Director at BBC Studios, working on franchise brands like BBC Earth, Children's, Doctor Who and Top Gear. Prior to that, she was Director of Product, Content and Creative at Pottermore, following over a decade as MD of Digital at Penguin Books. Anna is also Chair of the Women's Prize for Fiction, a Commissioner for the Digital Futures Commission, and sits on the Media, Entertainment and Sports Council for the World Economic Forum. In our conversation, she shares how she backs herself in moments of pressure, the power of procrastination, and why she relates to the song Surface Pressure from the Disney film Encanto. Anna, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation about pressure. Thank you.
My pleasure.
So, shall we start with the very simple question of, when do you remember feeling pressure for the first time?
Gosh, so I was thinking about this, and the truth is that I am the eldest daughter of a family of immigrants, and as has been well documented, not least in the most recent Encanto Disney movie, in Louisa's Surface Pressure song, there's often a lot of expectations on the eldest daughter in any family. And then when you add to that, I guess this, trope as it may be, but the child of immigrants, wanting to continue to progress and to take all of the chances that the parents didn't have offered to them, I recognize a lot of that, a huge amount of that in my childhood and in my education, and in that, that feeling of being at the forefront of a wave, and there being a force behind me of family and ancestors sort of going, go on and push forward, and therefore you have to achieve and step up and do things, because you're not just doing it for yourself, right? You're doing it for all of them as well. But I also remembered because that's a very big book, that story.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. Yes.
But something more specific that when I was kind of reflecting on the question came back to me, because I think I'd honestly forgotten about this. But in my first job out of university, so almost 25 years ago, I worked for lastminute.com. And at the time, it was a little one-room startup. I joined just as people were starting to hear about it. I joined just as the internet, I guess, as a consumer-facing thing that wasn't just academic, was starting to become known. And I joined in the auctions department. And what the auctions department did, so for my family, it was already a quirky thing. I didn't really understand what the internet was and what a website was. But then I joined the bit of Last Minute, which wasn't the mainstream bit. It wasn't the travel last minute bookings. It was the auctions bit. So it was the odd bit in the corner where we would partner with, I mean, technology products, for instance, or hotels or experiences to create something which felt a bit like you know, money couldn't buy. And whether that was a preview of the Palm Pilot or whether it was this wonderful experiential weekend, an incredible location, and we would auction it, so it didn't have a price tag. You know, people could decide what they wanted to pay. And I remember that I started on the Monday into a department of 2, and on the Thursday my boss left. And she had been planning to leave, she just hadn't told me. She had another job to go to. So I was the only person after 4 days who knew how the auctions department worked. And that meant how the actual website worked. So the HTML of it, which I had never studied, I had an English degree, all of the relationships with the suppliers, or any of the contracts we had ongoing that were, you know, had to be fulfilled in various ways. And the founders of the company, so Martha Lane Fox and Brent Hoberman, were wonderful, incredibly busy, but really great, did keep checking in. We were going to recruit a replacement, which I helped to do. But in the meantime, I was left running the department for probably about 3 months, which after a 4-day intensive training period. And it was incredible pressure. It was terrifying. But I realized that it was something, I mean, that whole experience of working in that .com kind of bubble and burst and through IPO and everything was incredibly wonderful, and but a pressure cooker for sure, you know, a real furnace in which a lot of things were forged in me. And I now realize that that first 4-day part just started the experience off as it meant to go on. And it was great for me ultimately, because it was fine. I got through it. People did help. I'm sure that I wasn't as alone as I felt, that there were lots of people keeping an eye on it. And it enabled me to be visible to those founders. It enabled me to do something important, to at least just keep it going. And then, of course, end up with a huge amount of knowledge that no one else in the company had to pull everything together. So, you know, it set me on a great path, I think.
That's fabulous. That's such a fabulous start, because there's just so many things in that. I love the word forged. You said it forged quite a lot in you. And I'm really curious to understand how these experiences of pressure, in the moment of pressure, does it feel like, oh yes, things are being forged, I'm going to be so much better as a result of this? You know, how did you, I suppose there's 2 questions here, Anna. How did your childhood, which you began with, enable you to deal with those 4 days, or not? Is there any relationship with it? It's the first question. The second question is, in the moment of the pressure, does it feel like forging? Or is it in hindsight that it becomes forging? What and it's play in that area for me a bit.
Yeah, 2 great questions. So to the first, you know, I'm not a child psychologist, and so this is my observation and anecdata and opinion. But I'm going to say yes, of course. You know that I believe that a lot of my childhood, as any child, it will be true for, you know, created patterns that then became my comfort zone, and that you then go to. And one of those things is banking on myself. So very much, you know, if something needs to be done, then who would you rather trust to get it done than yourself? Because I know I'll do it, you know, and I'll do it the way I want it to be done. And I know that was true in my childhood, and I know it's true now. It's one of these things that, you know, I see in people who work for me, and I think to myself, you want something done, ask a busy person, because that's what I see happening again and again. But, you know, I think that idea of just knowing I can deal with it and do it, I suppose it's confidence, isn't it? That if it's possible, I'm sure I can have a go. So I think that has come very much from just being used to having responsibility from a really early age.
Yes.
And of course, as a child, responsibility can mean pressure, and both, those things can be interchangeable. To your second question around, does it feel like forging at the time? It probably does now, because I'm old and I have more experience of this. But no, at the time, definitely not. It felt frightening. And, but I suppose what it didn't ever feel, that experience, or many others, it didn't feel like ultimate peril, like peril that I would never get out of. I always knew there'd be an end. I always knew, like, what's the worst that can happen at the end of this? And I think that sense of, which I now realize is maybe a sort of healthy sense of perspective that goes alongside, that idea of confidence, in that I love what I do, and I've been very privileged in my career to be able to choose jobs, for instance, that I believe in, that I think are important, and I recognize that's absolutely a privilege. But I also recognize the fact that my jobs are, and have been, probably pretty high up on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So they're important, but they're not baby brain surgery. Like, I want to deliver this project, or I want to, code this web page on an auction website. You know what? I really want to do that, and I believe I can do it. If I can't do it, I think it's okay. No puppies are going to die. And I suppose there's something that I've always known, that even though I wouldn't have been able to articulate it as confidently 25 years ago.
Yeah, that sounds really helpful. And that sense of knowing that you can back yourself, that's a real gift. I think there are many people that I work with who don't feel that, Anna. And that, how did you grow that? How do you grow that confidence that you can back yourself? I think it's gold dust, personally. I think it's absolutely gold dust. And at what point is that ever tested for you, I suppose?
I mean, I think it is gold dust, and I appreciate it. I think that there is a dangerous side to that, which is, like the risk of creeping into megalomania, where you need to have control over everything. And that would be my dark side, in which, in moments, particularly of pressure, where I would revert to, you know what, I'm just going to do it myself. Fine, I'm just going to do it. And that is not the right way to do things. That's not the right way to scale yourself. That's not the right way to lead teams. That's not the right way to to be able to perform on an ongoing basis. But if you can manage that and don't therefore want to take everything, I think that that idea of, again, maybe it's connected to perspective. I back myself because I believe that I'm going to work hard. I believe that I'm going to be thoughtful about what I do. And I believe that I have as much chance as anyone else. And maybe it's just not possible. And this is, this whole thing needs to be rethought and revised. I'm not saying that anything is possible. It's not sort of superhero territory, but I believe that I will do as good a job as anyone. And so therefore I may as well try, and then let's prove or disprove that. As to where that sense of, I believe I can probably do it as good as anyone else, that's a great question. I honestly don't know where that came from, and it has to have been my parents. It has to have been my mum, probably, who just had an unending confidence in my brother and I. Have a wonderful little anecdote, which is sort of tangential, and you may not want to use it, but when my little brother, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, he was about 5 or 6. He just started school, and my mum went in for her first parents' evening for him. And the teacher told her the story that the teacher had been observing my brother at lunchtimes. At lunchtimes, all the children had to line up and, to go in the door. And my brother would always walk to the front of the line. And all the other children completely accepted that. Fine, there was never any tension. And this teacher was watching it thinking, this is so odd. Why did he always walk to the front? Why doesn't anyone mind? And so one day she said to him, you have to wait your turn. This is like, they were here before you. You can't just walk to the front. And he turned around and he was so innocent in saying this, but he turned around and he said, but I'm the best. And it was because every moment of his life, my mother had told him he was the best. So he totally believed that. And therefore it was okay. And, I think there's probably downsides to that too, but there's something in that real sort of feeling like you're on just solid ground and secure and loved, and yes, there's a weight of expectation on you, but everyone believes you can do it. They're only pushing you forward because they know you can. That of course is, talk about forging, that's the forging, I suppose. That's the knitting of that character.
That's such a useful example, that, and just that the sort of power of what people tell you on a regular basis, and it can go either way, can't it? It can dwindle your sense of your own capability as equal as doing that fantastic sense of self that your mother gifted to your brother.
And I think about this because I think about my own sons. I have 2 little boys, and I really want them to believe that they can try anything, and they may not want to do something, and that's absolutely fine. And of course I believe in talents as well, but they are just as able to have a go as sort of anyone else. Like, why wouldn't they try it? I really don't want them to feel like, oh no, I can't. So but I don't think I've quite worked out quite the right way to do that with them. I'm still searching for the right way to land that message with them.
Yes, I'm sure. The never-ending journey of parenthood, about how to put things so that they're heard in the way that you want them to be heard.
And then they don't come out years later in a funny anecdote.
Yes. So I'm hearing that actually everything that you've spoken about so far, Anna, has been hugely helpful in you dealing with huge amounts of pressure that have been flung your way. And no doubt they go on in different shapes and different forms. How do you, though, going from somebody who, by her own admittance, can jump in when the pressure is on, to just sorting it out because you back yourself so brilliantly? How do you, as in your leadership journey, how have you learned to recognize when you do that? And what are the first signs that you recognize, oh, I'm being compelled here to jump in? And how have you grown it, or are you still evolving that leadership to allow others to be good and better in pressure?
I'm certainly still evolving it. I certainly don't think I'm anywhere near any kind of finished product at all. But I do feel, really just through deliberate practice of having smart people make me aware of when I haven't done this, to now have more of a deliberate punctuation. And it's an effort. So I use the word deliberate so many times because it's not immediate and natural. It's something which I have to remind myself to take a step back and say, what is the dynamic here actually? What do I need to occur? What is the right way to do this? And I'm very lucky because I work at the Lego Group and got a very strong focus on a good leadership culture, I think, and core values are incredibly strong, which enable a great framework for us to make decisions and to work with one another as colleagues. But in particular, we have this construct called the Leadership Playground, which is inspired, you may have heard of it, but it's inspired by this belief that children are our role models. And so there are core values that we observe in the way that children play, particularly in the playground, we think are of value in all of our leadership journey, and that is leading yourself as a person as well as leading a team or leading leading an organization. And they are clustered around this concept of bravery, really kind of feeling the fear and doing it anyway because you think it's the right thing to do. Curiosity, asking lots of questions, looking at things from a different point of view, and taking time to feel like you're getting under the skin of an issue or problem or someone else's perspective. And focus is the one that I have found all of our kind of focus on at the Lego group to be the most helpful for me, because it's not my, in my kind of natural life with my family, when I'm at my most relaxed, I am fast talking, I'm a rhizomatic thinker, I go in all sorts of directions, I enjoy that, I like that a lot, but in moments of crisis, and I think working with others, and particularly leading with others, either in moments of crisis or high pressure, particularly when they are feeling that, I have found through deliberate practice that I can pull focus. And actually, there are tools that I rely on that enable me to pull that in, to work out, okay, how should we proceed? And instead of seeing in front of me a map that has 40 different directions, which is my usual Saturday, I'm able to see a really clear path, and that is, I think, I mentioned this idea of having a really good decision making framework. And that for me is about knowing what your core values are. Like, what is it you are? What is it you're for? What do you need to do? What is important? Really being able to understand what's important, for you as a person, you as an organization, or in this project, whatever it might be, this decision you're about to make, what is actually important? What is the outcome that's important? And then being able to define the sequence to be able to get to that outcome. And in that, to create that clear path, you have to cut away everything extraneous. You have to be really focused, and that is the thing that I think, again, through practicing my intellectual muscles to get there, I am now confidently able to do that, and I particularly know that I'm good at doing that myself in moments of crisis for myself and with others, where I can talk them through and we can ferociously prioritize. I talk a lot about ferocious prioritization. Like, you can only do one thing and then the next thing and then the next thing. So what's the sequence in order to get us to that place? So I think that they're sort of really important things, and I think that I've just been told through years that this was important, and I've listened, and I believe it is true, and now I have a leadership framework in my organization which really supports it, which is very helpful.
Yes, I hear that. And also, I'm so intrigued as to how that has given permission, because you said earlier in that conversation, they will tell you, your team will tell you if you are taking control in the way that you say. How do they do? I mean, what have you set up to allow that to happen?
I like to hear back firstly. So I think that, and again, let me take my step back. So to ferociously prioritize, in order to enable that to happen, the number one thing that is essential is to have psychological safety with the team, so that they can say that. They can say, actually, I think that's my job, or I need to do that. Now that feels like that's two reasonably long words, but actually massive implications about how you set up an environment which has genuine psychological safety. And of course, it's not a constant either. That's something that you may have after a particularly great period of time, and it may go again for all sorts of reasons, which could be external. I think that lots of people and organizations have found the challenge over lockdowns and pandemics has really put the idea of psychological safety within teams under pressure, actually, because they're not spending time to one another, or they're spending time in sort of screen conversations like this one.
Anna makes a great point that while the last few years during the pandemic have been challenging for teams to truly connect, they've also had an impact on psychological safety and the space required for people to confidently speak and share their views. I love her phrase, deliberate punctuation. And we witnessed it play out in this very conversation when she was about to say something and instead paused, leant back in her chair and said, "Hang on a minute, let me take a step back." Anna described herself as an arrhythmic thinker, capable of going off in many directions, saying how in pressure situations she can feel the urge to jump in quickly to solve. She's learnt how to create deliberate punctuation for herself so that she can slow down and pull focus towards what really matters and create space for others. When so many of us are communicating virtually, it's very easy for our conversations to become purely transactional. Anna's emphasising the importance of building a safe space for real connection and honest interaction, particularly vital in moments of pressure.
But assuming that you can work on that, and again, that's something that I deliberately work on, and try and think about, schedule time in my diary to actually consider my team. What is the dynamic in the team between me and individuals, between them and themselves, to listen to them, to take moments of pause where collectively as a group we talk about what do we think, how are we feeling. We actually rate each of our team meetings. My leadership team has typically a monthly meeting, and we try and have the same set of questions at the end of each meeting. And one of the things we talk about is that, that we're open and that we feel like we can ask anything, we can collaborate, and it's anonymous. And that we can take that temperature and kind of go up and down. Assuming we do have base level of psychological safety between me and an individual, or laterally across, then the mechanic is to actually build in a pause of check-in to say, how do we feel about this? Is this right? How are you feeling about this suggestion, approach? Or if I'm working on my own, to actually build in a pause around thinking about my team and my stakeholders, and how do I, are the right people involved? Who will need to know? Am I doing it myself? Essentially.
Yes.
And again, all of that is, it's not instinctive. It is planned.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I suppose coming from a base state of having to back yourself and getting on with it and knowing that you're trusted to do that, it does take deliberate effort to put in another sort of pause moment to just check before you jump into that space, presumably.
Yeah, and I think I agree with that. Yes, of course it does. There's also something about the fact that, if you are achieving, and if you're a leader of organizations, people, projects, presumably you've got there by delivering things, by doing good work. And there's something psychologically hard about realizing, I guess, that idea of, what got you here might not get you there. That now you need to let others do some things which maybe you would have done in the past, and in fact you're enabling them to learn, to make mistakes, and that's something that as a somebody who might otherwise be known as a control freak without taking control of it, has to just have peace with. And that's where, again, if I go back to that sort of framework around what's actually important, once you isolate what's actually important, then look, people might do things in different ways, but that's okay. They can do it their own way, and there's a real freedom in that. You can be the ghost in your own machine when you set the framework up well. I think.
Does pressure ever catch you out, Anna?
I think less so than it did when I was younger. I feel pressure physically. So actually, my eye twitches. and it's a good tell.
Yes.
It's something that I used to hate, of course. It's involuntary. It's a muscle spasm.
Yeah.
But now I realize it's a real canary in the coal mine. It will tell me that there's something that I'm not comfortable with, and I probably need to sleep, do exercise, eat differently, take something off my plate, finish something, and tick it off, whatever it might be. So I think that having that, and also being able to therefore connect with my physical body, has been very helpful. I mean, the other thing that tells me when I'm really under pressure is if I can't sleep.
Yeah. Okay.
So a twitchy eye during the day and can't sleep at night, and then
can't shut them at night.
Then there's something that needs to change. There's something that's wrong and needs to change, and it rarely gets to that stage now.
Right. It's wonderful, the body, isn't it? I've never heard of the twitchy eye. You hear so many sort of similar things like stomach churning, or shaking, or going red, or but the twitchy eye, what I love about it also is it's involuntary, and that stuff is involuntary. You can't control the color you go, the heat you go, the stomach or the heart palpitation. All of these things are out of our control. So it's a brilliant, clever trick, isn't it? The body plays, and he just says, wake up, something's going on here, notice it, and do something with it.
Yeah, and I think that the power of noticing, then, you see, is then the thing that enables me to reverse it, or to take control of it, or to minimize, or whatever might be necessary. Yeah.
Gosh, I think that's such an important point, because when we fail to do that, or when we witness people in our teams, or people we're working with, or people in our families who fail, you're seeing something they're failing to see, and they strive on through it. That's when it becomes, I think, much harder to manage. Pressure then tips into not being better or positive. Actually, pressure becomes very debilitating and unhealthy, actually.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And then people feel like they're trapped, and maybe don't even know why, or why they're feeling the way they do.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you what do you do when there's a situation where you notice that somebody in your team is feeling pressure? It's not something that you particularly feel pressured about, or actually you might not even have put it in the pressure bucket. How do you lead people when their pressure threshold is different from yours?
So I guess there's two things that I now realize about myself, but that then can be helpful when leading others. So number one is that I'm very oral with an A. So I need to hear things to be able to process them. So, when I feel my own twitchy eye or insomnia, one of the things I will do is talk that sequencing that I said to you through, talk it through, like, okay, what is it I need to do? I'll say it out loud. I'll say it either to my long-suffering husband, or I've actually got a dictation app, which I find really helpful.
Yes.
I talk to a dictation app, and I will say, okay, this is what I need. Let's take a step back. This is what I need to achieve. This is what's really important. These things are nice to have, but less important. How am I going to get there? Okay, number one, number two, number three, number four, and I will talk it through. And then I can listen to myself saying it, and then maybe listen to it back, and then I can process it. So with that knowledge of myself, a lot of, I will want to offer that service of being the sounding board to my team. And they may not wish to take up that offer, of course, but that idea of, I just talk it at me, I'm just going to sit here, you just talk me through, and here's how I would put some headings, like, what do you really need, what's really important, how are you going to get there? So again, give them a framework, and then allow them to talk it through, answer questions if they want to. That's sort of number one, which I find really helpful. Number two actually comes out of an anecdote of a wonderful woman that I used to work with at the Penguin Books, Penguin Publishing. And she was the general counsel and company secretary, and she's called Helena Peacock, and she has retired now, and she's absolutely magnificent and so beloved by everybody who worked with her, and just phenomenal in every way. And one of the things that was phenomenal amongst the many qualities that Helena had was we talk about noticing. She was also incredibly aware of own impact on others.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember seeing it for the first time in a real sort of epiphany moment, where we were having a difficult conversation with a member of a team who was having a really hard time and being very emotional and being unreasonable in what they were saying. But it was because it was coming from emotion, and everybody understood. And there was a pause when the person had finished. And Helena said, and it wasn't being facetious or passive aggressive or anything like that at all. She said, "Now, what did you hope to achieve by saying that?" And it really made me think, oh, gosh, Helena has got something she hopes to achieve with everything she says.
Yes.
and I didn't. Sometimes just things just, my mouth just opened and things came out. And it made me realize that again, moment of noticing, hearing it, talking it through, but also then thinking, well, what do I want to achieve with every action that I'm going to do, is a really powerful thing to, powerful tool if you can get your hands around it. And that's another tool that, as a gift, I would like to offer sometimes to people on my team. We can say, what do we need to achieve at each of these different stages? In this presentation you want to give, in this pitch you need to win, what is it that we really need to achieve? And so I guess my style is summed up in quite a coaching style, to try and be there for them to explore it themselves, but when they need to, and if they can't get to answering those questions, then I can act as a filter to help them say, okay, here's what I think is really important, and see if that helps. But I'd much rather they were able to, they were given the space to do that themselves.
Yes. And do you share with them the times when you feel the pressure, like your twitchy eye, or the fact that you haven't been able to sleep, or that you feel it as well?
It's a really interesting one. I don't have the right answer for this. So the short answer is yes, I sometimes do, and I never quite know if it's exactly right. I want, on the one hand, to be the confident, I think the analogy that I was once told was the air steward. So the air steward on the plane, even at the most crisis-ridden, kind of bumpiest times, it's even more important for them to maintain a very calm facade, because not to do so will cause panic and make the situation worse. So they have to absolutely smile and have poise and not kind of leak their emotions, however much their eye might be twitching. I think there's something very beneficial in that. And I think that, when setting direction sometimes for a team, even if it feels scary and you feel a bit nervous about it, actually they really want to trust that you're very confident, and that's all they need to be able to go ahead and to do that. At the same time, I think it is authentic, and I keep talking about the fact that it's the deliberate effort for me to kind of pause and punctuate and notice, because my authentic self is to say, I'm feeling worried about this. I'm feeling, here are the three things that are on my mind, and I want to be open and share that. I want to show that vulnerability, but I only want to do that if it's helpful. So that's the thing. I don't want to land it on them, because they have a lot to think about as well. But I do think that there's a way in which we can be a team, and we can acknowledge that we're feeling nervous about something, and then move on.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting concept, that sense of how much it's the authenticity paradox, really, isn't it? It's just like, when is it okay to reveal? And actually, it's very important you reveal. And when is it not helpful or useful for people for you to reveal? And actually, it's your responsibility to, in my words, act as if.
Yeah. And I think that comes back to, what did you hope to achieve by this? Because it's very much, what's the impact you intend to have? Because if this is just me vomiting out uncertainty, then I'm not sure how helpful that is for me or anyone. It may feel like a purge and cathartic, but actually that's pretty short term. If what it's going to really do is destabilize or fundamentally worry the team who may not have all the context either. It's a bit like when, children, well, they sound terribly passionate. I don't mean that, but, you're mindful about how you share information, because they don't always have all of the context, or therefore it's completely natural that somebody might jump to a conclusion which isn't right, and then that would feel much worse for them. So I think it's about really trying to think about it's empathy, isn't it? What's the context, what's the information that person has, therefore what's the impact going to be on them if I behave in this way, and it may be positive and it may not be, and therefore I need to use judgment.
It's so refreshing to hear Anna say, yes, I sometimes do share with my team how I'm feeling in moments of pressure, but I never really know if it's the right thing to do. Just listening to that reminds me of moments in my life, particularly as a new teacher, and definitely as a mother, when I've fallen foul of what I call gut to gob moments. Those moments when I wish I'd spent a bit more time considering and choosing what I hoped to achieve before I'd opened my mouth. Whether to be like the air steward, remaining calm and not leaking emotions during bumpy rides that unnerve your passengers, or to show vulnerability and share what's really going on for you, is a dilemma that sits at the heart of many conversations I have. Anna says she wants to show vulnerability, but only if it's helpful. And that's an even tougher call when you're in moments of pressure. Knowing how to choose which reaction is most useful in the moment requires us to have ways to pause so that we can choose the intended impact. And that's the tough bit. That's what I fail to do in my gut to gob moments. I fail to create that moment of choice and ask myself, what's the impact I intend to have? And I suppose it's always a dilemma, isn't it? Because you want them to be able to share as well. And part of the deal is if they feel it's safe for you to share, then it's safe for them to share too.
And that's absolutely true. And I think that can still entirely happen, and this brings us back to psychological safety, right?
It does.
There's lots of ways in which you can do that, and that's part of it. Being able to share that you are human and that you have things that are on your mind. And recently my eldest son is going into secondary school, and the whole process where you have to wait to hear which school your child is going to go to is very nerve-wracking. My team lived it with me. They absolutely lived it with me, and it was something that I hope I didn't burden them with, but was very human, I think, for us all. To be able to bond over.
So what is the worst pressure, do you think, Anna, that you have ever dealt with?
I've dealt with loads of horrible pressurized situations, and in a way that I say horrible pressurized situations, big global brands that have really high standards of excellence, really high visibility, and therefore often high stakes. High stakes if it goes wrong, partners, complicated deals or products that are being created. Often, because I've been lucky that in my career, often what I have been doing has been leading something new, innovating. So there's also not the same paths to follow or rule books to follow, and we have to do a bit of testing and experimenting. That can all be incredibly pressurized. And there is, I think, the worst moment of pressure I ever felt was there was a project, a very real project, with one of the biggest brands in the world, which I won't share, but you can probably guess. And one of the biggest companies in the world as a partner. And it was due to launch this morning. And on this morning, so it was a digital product. And the thing about digital products is that they're tested and tested and tested. And then they're put into a live environment, into the real environment. And they should behave exactly the way they behaved in all the test environments. And every now and again, one thing will go wrong. And this case, this morning, one thing went wrong. Now, it was one thing, I will give you the context, out of over 600 things. So there was sort of 600 moments that could have gone wrong and they didn't, and one did. So it's pretty small, could be fixed, etc. The day it was going to launch, we had the world's press invited for a press launch. There was a party scheduled that night. Partners were flying in from all over the world to be at the press launch, to do interviews, to go to the party that evening. But I knew that there was a flaw in the product, and soon it would be evident. Again, it wasn't the worst flaw in the world, but it was a flaw. It didn't hit the standards of either of the partners. And I had to make a call. And there was, on one side, there was huge amount of pressure, expectation, big day. People have flown in for this. There's so much money riding on this thing today. We've got space booked at the bar, etc. And on the other hand, there's like, this is what I believe are our standards. This is what the expectations are. And again, that moment of, okay, what are the core values here? One of them was around excellence and storytelling. And so there was no one else who would make the call. It was my call. I could go and get input from people, but it was down to me. And I made the call to pull the launch, and pause, fix the thing, do it instead a week later. And it was, people were crying. I was very worried about some of the team who were in a different time zone to me, and I couldn't go and comfort them. They were incredibly upset. They felt that it was their fault, that they were going to be fired, that they were in real trouble. But once I'd made the decision, and I'm very rigorous, I'm a real girl guide about these things. I have to do my, what is it we're really doing? Answer all my questions. But then I have it. Then I have okay, this is my rationale. I'm really clear on my rationale. I know that all of these things, it's very unfortunate that this is the trade-off, but this is the rationale. And I really remember feeling that moment of utter dread to have to open my mouth and say, I'm pulling the launch, and feeling incredible afterwards because I knew it was the right thing. And and I knew I'd done my homework, and I felt like, I can justify this. Someone can overrule me if they want to. No one did. But it was the right thing. But that was horrendous.
Sounds it. Absolutely sounds it.
But, going back to just the first thing up front, the thing is, all of that, really horrendous. But, everything that I've ever worked on in sort of art and entertainment and play, there's a huge component about being human at the center of all of those things. That's what makes them succeed. And therefore, we have to realize that we're all human, and that we're going to have these difficult things, and it's not, it's okay. It's not that big a deal. It's not baby brain surgery.
No,
which must be incredibly pressurized.
I so agree with you. And it struck me when you said to me, once I'd made that tough decision around, pulling the launch, the utter, you didn't actually use the word relief. You said how great you felt once you said it, because it's that build up to the decision, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like the dark side of anticipation, isn't it?
Yeah.
But once through it, I was like, you know what, it's right. It's the right thing to do. Yeah. I feel, and there's very sort of like, okay, come at me, because I'll stand by this. This is the right thing to do.
I think that's so helpful, and I don't think you should be worried about it in any way being dictatorial, because I think this is what I think in the work that I'm doing. People want to talk about this because, and particularly as you get more senior, you get in your own bubble and lonely. It's like you're working it out on your own, basically.
Yeah.
And I've already had feedback from some of the other ones that people are just so loving the fact that people are talking about this, because everyone has different ways of doing it. There's no right, no wrong. It's just what works for you. But what I've really got from this one is, I think people suffer through decision making or find it painful because they haven't done the really deliberate work prior to the decision, so that they can absolutely back themselves. And so I'm hearing a few things in there that are clearly very helpful for you, Anna, and it's sort of they've been drip fed up in this conversation up to this point, I think. And one of them is the thoroughness of your thinking. You called it rigorous focus, I think, or something, but that just taking it down to, okay, what can we do, and building your rationale for the decision you're about to make. Plus, I'm hearing a very clear sense of perspective on the decision that you're making. So to mitigate the immense nature of the decision taking over you, in an overwhelming you, this sense of perspective sounds incredibly useful to you. It's a decision. Yes, it's an important decision, but it's not a life-saving decision. Sounds like that's incredibly useful for you to keep yourself focused on the rationale.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, and I find that really helpful. And of course, there are decisions that leaders have to make, which are perhaps smaller in the scope of the business in terms of commercial impact, but are closer to life-saving. They impact people's lives, they impact people's jobs. Those are the ones actually that I find that I spend even more time on, of course. And that's where, again, I am incredibly rigorous. I really do exercise that curiosity model, in that I do ask huge amounts of questions. I do all of my homework. I am really clear about why a decision is being made, what the trade-offs are, what the rationale is. I start with an assumption that I don't know all there is to know. So I start with the assumption of filling in my own gaps. And therefore, because it's so important, because that decision, which may be changing someone's life, is incredibly important. So it's not to minimize any of that. And again, to feel the weight of a decision about somebody's life, not life or death, but their lifestyle, their daily life, the only way I can feel like I'm legitimately allowed to do that is that I have given it the care and attention and deliberate practice that I need to be able to then explain and share it and justify it to them.
Yeah. And is there anything else in the way you do that that's important? Like, I'm thinking, do you go to a particular place to do that? Isn't there an environment that you do this in? I mean, because often these things become unconscious in your as you become more expert at them, how you do it becomes almost less conscious. So I'm just, in terms of unpicking this, is there an environment? What else do you do in those moments?
I've never really thought about that, but now that I reflect on it, I think that I absorb myself in, after I've done my listening. So listen to my own self, so done my homework, listen to my own self talking it through. I frequently absorb myself in some kind of creative domestic task. So cooking, often, baking. I will clear out that cupboard that really needs clearing out, or something like that, which feels constructive, but is also quite absorbing, often quite physical, requires me to just put my brain in a completely different place. I don't think that's ever been something that I've deliberately planned, but it's absolutely what I do, and I will go off and I will bake something hard, or I'll make a dishoom curry that takes 2 days, or something quite intricate in that way. But all the time, I know I'm processing what I've written and what I've heard and what I've thought about, and then I'll go back to it. Yeah. And I'm sure that there'll be all sorts of different, not everyone is going to go off and make a curry, and they'll do different things. But like, honestly, I find that's a very helpful thing to me. Obviously, I also, get in the bath with a book and stuff, but it's more useful to me to do something with my hands than with my head at that stage.
And it's got this resonance to me of literally embedding
interesting
the thought, the thinking. I think it's got something very tactical about embedding it, doing something from beginning, middle to end, constructing the thought through another. And I am sure the neuroscience would support that. It's going off, but taking the thought through a different sensory factor.
Really interesting. And I also really believe in procrastination now, which I didn't talk about, and it used to be something that was so I was so ashamed of it because I'm a desperate procrastinator, but I really believe in the power of procrastination now, in that actually you're processing, you're thinking about, thinking and you're thinking and and I'm not writing this deck, and I should be, and I'm feeling guilty about it, but I'm thinking about it. And then when I do it, I can do it faster and better.
Boom. I think there's a lot in that. I agree with you. So, Anna, as you know, in this podcast, there's a couple of questions that I ask all of my guests. If there's somebody listening to this podcast who is on the journey of wanting to be better in pressure situations, what 2 things would you want to pass forward to them? What's the first one?
At the risk of being very repetitive, you're right, I have said this already. I think that we all need to know, in general, at a macro level, and then specifically that pressurized situation, what is your decision-making framework? What are your core values? What do you hope to achieve? What is important now? Be able to get forensic around those questions to achieve real simplicity and clarity around those things, because that will allow you to see where you can cut what is extraneous and how you can find that path forward. But I think it is a deliberate practice that you do have to, for me, I have to write out the questions and I have to answer them for myself and go through them. So that would be number one.
You write that and you don't use your audio device for that?
I write it and then I read it to myself, because I have to hear myself to process it.
Yeah.
And the second thing is subsequent to really feeling confident about that framework. It's the ferocious prioritization of how you're going to get there. Like the real, and you've really got to be ferocious then. You've really got to say, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to oversee this thing. I'm going to let them do it. It'll be fine. You need to be fierce. And again, for me, I need to consciously decide it, say it, hear it to make it real. And then I know I've done that. I have my peace with it. This is my prioritization. This is how I'm going to do it. And then I can sleep.
That's very useful to listen to the way you lay that out. And I have a question that comes up as you're talking, Anna, that says, do you do this for your family life? When you have pressure moments in your family life, is it the same strategy?
The thing about my family life is that there's no single accountability.
Okay.
So the closest was the school situation that I referenced earlier. And we did do a framework and we did do a prioritization, but I did it with my husband and with my son. So it is it's a different beast. But ultimately, absolutely, what's really important? What do we really want? What do we really need? Okay, now how are we going to do that?
And do your children come to you with moments of pressure?
Not so much yet. I'm expecting more soon. They're still a bit little for that. And so we don't, I'm already thinking that I want to be able to articulate to them and make them feel confident that they are working hard enough. If they know they're working hard enough, they're working hard enough. So there's no point kind of being stressed about it, that they can have a go at things, that they can try, that they have that confidence to try a new musical instrument or go to something that they haven't done before, because the default, not always but often, is, I haven't done it, and I want to land that with them. So I think we're still at that stage of I'm trying to build them up, and then they'll get into a situation where they'll be under pressure.
Yes, and hopefully they'll be able to talk about it. I hope so.
That's
great, Anna. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening.
Fascinating conversation. That's really good.
I hope that's helpful for someone, and it feels very didactic. And as I said, a lot of this has been something that I've had to be deliberate about. Really, it doesn't always feel like your muscle memory is something else. My muscle memory that snaps in is to do it myself. So I've really had to practice this. Say, this isn't what I want to do. What I want to do is to set framework and then be able to scale it for myself and for others.
The reason I set this podcast up is because I fundamentally believe that we can be better through pressure. I'm wondering, do you believe in that statement that we can be better under pressure?
Yeah, I believe that every time. I think it's maybe not always under pressure, although actually I feel now confident under pressure. I know that I feel I've got the tools to be able to deal with it and to get to the right results. So pressure doesn't frighten me anymore. It doesn't scare me. I'm not avoiding it at all. I think that's fine, natural, and I will plan for it actually in my year, and I'll know that there'll be times of pressure coming up, and I will try and help my team prepare for these moments of pressure as well at key milestones. But what I definitely believe is that we're better after pressure. That once we deal with it, and that could be because of the results of what we've managed to decide or achieve or deliver or do, or it could be because of our own self-belief and kind of personal learning, or both those things, and the relationships that you often forge as well under pressure. All of those things, I think, are absolutely positive, and therefore I genuinely believe that you're better after pressure.
What a great place to stop. Thank you, Anna.
Well, I am looking forward with trepidation to hearing it. I hate my voice, and I know because I hear it all the time. But I really am. It was very, very enjoyable to talk to you. So lovely to see you.
And you too, Anna. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Better Under Pressure with me, Sara Milne Rowe. If you enjoyed it, please do subscribe and let us know what you found useful or what you'd like to know more about. Our aim is to share as many examples as possible of what people do to manage pressure for better. If you're interested in any of the practices mentioned, check out my book, The Shed Method. Alternatively, you can find us at Coaching Impact or me on LinkedIn and Instagram. Better Under Pressure was produced by the fab team at Smart Cookie Media. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, goodbye.